So glad to have you all here. My name's Jason, coming to you from Virginia. I wanted to talk a little bit about side businesses for professors. A couple of things I want to point out right away. I am recording this session. I'm only going to keep the parts of it that are completely anonymous. What I'm going to do is present for a while, probably about 45 or 50 minutes of content. And then at the end, I'll hang around to answer as many questions as I can. Obviously, I'll trim off the Q&A at the end and just keep the presentation for those who missed it. Um, there is no pitch. I do not that there's anything wrong with those sorts of things, but I do not have a high-priced coaching package or a course or anything like that. The reason why I'm doing this, like I mentioned in the online posts and things like that, is that I'm working on a book for professors to how to create side businesses, and this is the best way I can think of to get feedback on some of the content relatively early in the process. Um, as I have gone through my own process of creating side businesses, the main thing that I discovered that I needed, the first step in the process was always mindset. It was always getting to the point where I believed that I could actually do this, create a business that somebody would want to pay for. Um, the best way that I know of to do that is to give you lots of examples. I can remember 10, 15 years ago, as I was starting this process, what I really clung to were different examples, especially examples where it just kind of struck me as like, that doesn't seem that complicated. That doesn't seem that difficult. And so we are going to talk a lot about some different examples today, some from professors, some not. And the best way I have found to break those examples into something that is manageable is to look at the 6 types of side businesses that I think are especially relevant for professors. Just a little bit about me in case you're curious about some of the details and where I'm coming from. My background is in counseling psych. I was a professor for 14 years at a small liberal arts college in the United States, in the state of Tennessee. I started my first side business in 2009, about 4 or 5 years after I started my tenure track position. I really started more seriously around 2014. And then over about 4 years, the side business has built up to the point where it was about ready to replace my salary. And I thought if I could go full time, then I could probably figure it out and make more on my side businesses. So I did resign. I've been self-employed since 2018. I am I'm married with 3 kids. I'm our family's sole breadwinner, and so this is not kind of part-time, a small amount of income or part-time income for me at this point. The goal is not necessarily to get you to the point where you can quit your job. It all starts at just making some extra income from your expertise. So, a little bit about my side business journey, and I will give examples of what my side businesses are as we go through the 6 different types. But it was really born out of desperation. I uh, was hired in 2004. I started the fall 2004, which means I came up for tenure in 2010, right in the midst of the Great Recession here in the United States. Um, and I needed additional income. That was all there was all there was to it. At this point, it has really shifted to uh, being really gratifying and me being very grateful that I was able to do that. I think all professors should have side businesses because I think it's such an amazing opportunity to share your expertise in a new way with new audiences. Uh, my expertise, my interests have reached and helped so many more people than they would have if I hadn't started side businesses. Um, at my small college, we had about 80 faculty members, and we still had faculty meetings where we would all get together in the same room. So I was one of 80 PhDs in the room. Now I am often one out of 100, one out of 300 people in a room, and I'm the only PhD. And I'm in rooms where people pay attention to what I say and really value my expertise. And businesses say, we want to take you out for a fancy dinner and we want to hire you to do this and that. And it's just really, really gratifying to kind of to see that. And so I just wanted to be able to share that with other professors. I think there's so much expertise out there that is not getting out into the world where it can really help folks. We're going to be talking a lot about businesses that have, I want to give examples of businesses that are surviving, that have at least some years behind them and some success behind them. But I don't want that to cloud your judgment in terms of all side businesses start small. They start with one presentation, they start with helping one person or one business, they start with one project, those sorts of things. That's where everybody starts. So I hope the examples don't intimidate you because they might seem uh, like they're pretty big or that they seem complicated or something like that. When it comes down to it, really what you want to do is just focus on helping somebody else. What I had to learn very quickly was that most of the advice out there for starting a business was, uh, in many cases, geared towards people who wanted to start a large business, wanted to hire employees, and in many cases wanted to seek funding. So, at least in the U.S., talking about like Silicon Valley sorts of businesses, angel investors trying to be the next Facebook or Uber or WeWork or whatever it might be. That is nothing what I wanted to do. I have no desire to do that, even if I think I could do sort of that. So ignoring a lot of that. And then also with the rest of the advice, determining what was really important at the beginning and what was really optimization. Um, but I would say that, as you look for other resources, as you listen to business podcasts or books, a lot of it isn't going to relate to you. What I'm going to talk about are more examples that are more relatable to the person who started selling something at the farmer's market, who then got a food truck, who then got a restaurant. That is the type of model that I am more attracted to as an example than something like an Uber. Let's go see if we can get $1 million and then hire a bunch of people and race to try to make it profitable and often failing. That has no interest for me whatsoever. Why these six types of side businesses? Um, if you are working full-time or part-time right now, you need to be efficient. You have a limited amount of time to make some extra income. And so what we want to do is leverage that expertise so that you can be efficient and make a reasonable return on that effort and investment. So these six subtypes really focus on turning your expertise into additional income. I have nothing against side jobs, but I really specifically do focus on side businesses. When I started, I wanted to be in complete control of what I did, how much I charged, who I worked for, when I made adjustments, those sorts of things. And so there's pros and cons to everything. If you need income right away, if you're having trouble paying the rent this month or your mortgage this month, you probably need a side job, which would just be simply working for someone else and getting paid for your expertise in that way. I don't have much experience doing that. I encourage people, if you can, to start early and build a side business that you would have complete control over. But it is something, the big downside to side businesses is that it probably doesn't happen. It doesn't mean you're getting paid next week in most cases. The other thing that I won't be talking about is products, other than something that can be ordered and printed. Uh, I have never created a product. I don't know about getting a patent on something. I don't know about finding a factory. So if you're thinking about creating the next best kitchen gadget or something like that, there are other resources that are probably much better, sure, are much better for that. So those are some things we're not going to talk about. These are the six types of side businesses as I break them out. This idea of expertise that earns, skills that serve, paid to publish, speak to solve, teach to transform, and convene to connect. So we'll go through each one of these. We'll talk a little bit about how I define it, give a couple of examples of side businesses that fit within that type. And usually I'll cover one major mistake that professors often make or might make as they explore that type of side business. I have done all five. I've done five of the six. I have not created a community that I've been paid for. That is something that might happen in the future, but I have uh, created income from the other five, and in a lot of cases, I'll kind of use an example from my own life and share a little bit about what that was. The first one is expertise that earns. This is where you're selling your judgment and focusing on, could be renamed as consulting. But I really want to point out that consulting is focusing on the advising and reviewing part of it, not the doing part of it. So often, professors as part of your role at a college or university is providing advising, often to obviously often to students, sometimes to the institution, and that's part of your job. And it's not something that we bill separately for. Um, when a business hires you to provide consulting, to review something, to give you advice, to give your advice on something, they're looking for peace of mind. They're looking to reduce their risk, and that is very valuable in a lot of situations. They're looking to save time, especially when they're starting something, a new initiative or a new project. If you can get them up to speed in like one meeting, what might have taken them 2 months or 6 months, that can be really valuable. And also, in some cases, they might want to attach your name to something that you're advising on. And so, Dr. So and so approved this, Dr. So and so advised us on this. And so, it builds their credibility and their authority pretty quickly. So, what we want to remember here is that while consulting may also include doing piece of it, you should be able to charge just for the advice and just for reviewing, not necessarily providing a specific service. Here's an example of one. As I go through some of the examples, I'll let you know if I know the person. I also am pulling out examples that I just found from various resources. Dr. Kasperix, I do not happen to know. I did like the way she framed her consulting business because, as you can see in the description there, I'm always trying to use pictures and descriptions that the uh, the individual, the professor has used or that they've cited on their own website or things like that. But this is provides a specific service for program evaluation for NSF grants or Department of Education grants, which often require this external evaluator. So I can only imagine, I'm making some guesses here, but um, she would tout some of the resources as I've done this before. I know what NSF is looking for. You're less likely to get this rejected. They're more likely to accept the program evaluation because I've done a lot of these and just having experience in that area and doing those sorts of things. The one big mistake that we often give, because we often give advice for free, is continuing to do that and then only charging for the implementation. Your advice is valuable. Now, there is an important distinction here. One of the best things that a professor has for creating, positioning themselves as an expert in a field is to provide some education and to speak and write on certain topics so that people can see that you know what you're talking about in a specific area. So the distinction would be, yes, go ahead and educate for awareness, and that might often very, very well be free, but then charge for advice when it is related to a specific business or entity. So, for example, you might have some expertise in marketing, and maybe you've done some research or an expert on different generations and how marketing is related to different generations. And you may even niche down further and specifically work with dentists. So you might write an article or do a presentation for dentists talking in general about how marketing can be related to different generations, be effective for certain generations and not. That you might do for free, especially you might write an article for a dentist trade publication, for example, and your name's there, and people, a dentist say, oh, if we have questions about marketing, this would be a person we want to reach out to. That's very different than if a business that had 20 dentist office says, we have a year of social media content. We want you to review it for us and give us advice. That you should absolutely charge for, obviously, because that is a specific business that's going to benefit from that. But don't be in the, just be careful about giving your specific advice that a business could benefit from very directly, giving that away for free. One consulting project that I worked on, my area of expertise within counseling psychology is grief and bereavement. And so I work a lot with funeral professionals, funeral businesses, cemetery businesses, end of life businesses like hospice and things like that. And so I worked with, it was actually an insurance company that worked with funeral businesses, and they wanted to gain their attention by providing resources related to burnout. And so I gave them advice on, okay, this is what a burnout prevention program that you might create should include. I think it should include kind of some sort of information guide. It should include presentations that you would do at conventions, perhaps a weekly email, those sorts of things. In this case, they then did hire me to actually create some of those resources. And so I was involved in the implementation which is our next step. But I want to point out again, you should be charging just for the advice if it's that specific. This leads us into our second type of business, which I call skills that serve. This is where you're selling your specialized abilities because clients value things that are done for them, especially when it's done by an expert. There are two common situations here. One is that you have a specialized skill that they literally can't do. Maybe you have expertise in a specific statistical test or dealing with certain databases. Maybe you have a specialized skill in a laboratory with specialized equipment, those sorts of things. Or maybe it's just convenience. Maybe they're like, well, we could train somebody eventually to do it. We could hire somebody to do it. But for whatever reason, it's just not worth it to us. It's actually better for us to pay for somebody to do it. It might just be we just value someone doing it for us because all of our current employees are busy with other things. And so it's just a convenience sort of a thing. There's a variety of different things. This list could go on and on, different specialized abilities that you might have that you've gained throughout your training that could be relevant to businesses in different situations. One example, let's say I could see this being like a technical theater director. I could see this being a communications professor who's also interested in podcasting. Maybe you've set up a podcast on your own and maybe you're in a mid or large size city and you know there's a lot of businesses or associations or organizations who are like, we really want to create our own podcast. We finally want to jump in and we think this is a way that we could connect with customers, we could connect with association members, but it just seems like a big hurdle. And so your business might be something like, look, in 2 weeks, just have whoever's going to, from your organization, who's going to be on the podcast. I will have everything set up from equipment to podcast hosting to editing the podcast afterward to getting it out there and maybe even giving your team members a little bit of coaching about what to do in the podcast. And everything will be set up. They just have to show up and start talking. And all of a sudden, when you remove those barriers, all of a sudden it gets to be really attractive. So you might sell a package where it's like, I'll set you up and let's plan to at least test this idea. Let's at least do 15 podcast episodes. I'll edit and host and post all of those as an example. This is another example, maybe a little bit more of a traditional example. Dr. Cassette has several different services, but I'm focusing on the copy editing one. This is where we're providing that direct service for individuals who might be writing a book, academics who are working on dissertations or articles. As you can see, she's also an example of our sixth type, which is creating community, because she does train other people on how to become an academic editor or a coach, because she has a group coaching program. But for number two, the skills that serve, we're focusing on her copy editing for this example. One way you can think about what skills you might have and how it might reach a specific business or field is kind of this framework or some version of this framework. I help this type of client achieve this type of outcome by providing this service. So I'm not going to read them to you here, but a couple of examples. Try to include a variety of different academic fields there in our examples. The big mistake that I sometimes see professors making and other folks is that if you're not careful, you can, because this is service delivery and it typically involves your time, you want to be really careful how you set it up. You don't want to wake up 6 months later and realize I just created a tedious assembly line. And even worse, make it so that it isn't financially rewarding. You might do the math and all of a sudden you realize you're making $11 an hour. It's like, well, that really isn't worth the effort in this situation. I was expecting to get more out of this. So you want to really make sure that you are providing a service that has a high enough value to your client that they're willing to pay well for it. And then also using all the ways that you can think of to be efficient and leverage your expertise to deliver that in a concise, time-effective sort of way. We're up to number three. Number three is paid to publish. This is when you're selling your content. So this is creating expertise-based content for clients for pay. Probably the most traditional examples would be writing white papers, reports, maybe a book for a client in certain situations. But I would also encourage you to think more broadly. It might be creating a trifold pamphlet for them. It might be creating a booklet. It doesn't even have to be written. It might be music. It might be auditory. It might be design or artwork, or something graphic, those sorts of things, or a manual or those just a wide variety of different types of content that you could have here. There's a couple of different ways, like why would somebody hire you to do this? A couple of different ways that you create value for your client. One, often this is part of a process where they want to gain the attention of their prospective customers. So you might have a client that sells something for 5,000, 50,000, $1 million. And in those situations, they're willing to pay to get the attention of their prospective customers. And so one way to do that is to bring in the PhDs, somebody that looks, increases their prestige or value when you might provide content that they couldn't create on their own that has additional value. And in some cases, most often it is one of these two things where you are helping their sales process in one way or another. There is another place where they might hire you related to your content, and that might be related to the internal challenges they might have. If you're helping them reduce turnover or burnout, if by creating content, you're helping them with leadership development, that could also be something that they really value as well. It's more likely to be the first couple, they tend to really value. If you can directly show that your content helps get them sales, you can kind of write your own ticket at that point. Couple of examples here. This is Dr. Crookston. Notice she is not necessarily a lit or writing. That's not what she has her PhD in. She's a ghostwriter for business professionals, specifically, if I remember her website correctly. And if I'm remembering kind of her value proposition is like, if you want to get your name and your ideas out there to your prospective clients so that you can generate business, maybe create speaking opportunities, things, I can help you do that faster and create a better book. And so that's the trade-off in that sort of situation. The big mistake I see people, and this is probably the slide that I would encourage, if I had one slide that I would want you to remember, it's probably this one. This took me a long time to learn, and I'm still learning it all the time. The big mistake is we create something and we hope to sell, and then hope to sell it. That's what professors do. We start writing, we start creating, we start researching, and then we hope somebody wants it later on. What I would encourage you to think about, and believe me, I've made this mistake consistently. Instead, find a client who wants something, then create what they want, assuming it matches your values and all that sort of stuff. Create it knowing that you're already going to get paid for it. We all know faculty who have written a book for one reason or another, but maybe part of the reason was hoping that they would make some income off of it, and that just doesn't happen. And that's unfortunately a very common situation. Let me give you a couple of examples of this. I'm trained to be a therapist, but I do not work as a therapist. I don't see individual clients, but I do have an expertise of helping people who are bereaved. So what I did is I created a 60-video self-guided grief program. Each video is about 5 minutes, and it's designed to be something that people could work their way through on their own, choosing the videos that are relevant to their situation and their challenges after a loss. What I did is what almost everybody did, created this program, put it out on a website and said, hey, you can buy this for $49. It's 10 hours of content. It's less than half of the price of a single counseling session. I haven't really marketed it very well, but it is a very small proportion of my sales because I finally took my own advice. And what I did was like, who would want this that would pay for it all the time? And so what I did is I partnered with a website company that works with funeral and cemetery businesses, and it puts them on their websites. So Johnson Funeral Home in Des Moines, Iowa might have my grief plan program built into their website, put there by their website company. And that funeral home pays me $200 a year just for the right to have it on there. So then they can go to their families who've recently lost someone and say, hey, we have this grief program. It's created by Dr. Troyer. He's a grief expert. We're going to give that to you for free, and anyone in our community who wants to use that. And I get paid by kind of like a yearly subscription to have my content on their page. So you can do the math there. That is a much higher rate of sales. And so I know what income I'm getting from that program. I don't have to kind of work at marketing it all the time, except we're marketing it to those funeral homes and cemeteries and trying to increase the number of clients that I would have. But that's very different than trying to get each individual person to use it. The other classic example is I've done what a lot of other professors have done. I wrote my kind of my big research book, had it published. I am proud of it, but I am not thrilled about the RO, the return on investment. I suspect that I probably have made less than $1 an hour that I spent working on this book. The joke around our household is when the royalty check comes in, is it enough to take the whole family out for sushi? Usually the answer is no. Again, I'm proud of it. I'm glad I did it. But if I think back, I may have used that time differently. It just so happens in the same year that that book came out, I was starting to look at side businesses, and I thought, well, maybe I could take my knowledge about grief and loss and create a much shorter uh, booklet that people might use in a specific situation. The idea was to sell these booklets to businesses that, in this case, the loss of a pet. So a pet cremation business would be the most likely target. It took me quite a while to narrow it down to 36 pages. I didn't think I could possibly make it any shorter because there was just certain things that had to be in it. What I have learned over time and over 11 years is actually my latest version of that booklet is down to 8 pages because that's what people will read. Most people are not professors. They don't want to read a lot. They want the most pertinent information for them, or if they're helping a loved one, say a child who's grieving their family dog or something like that, they want it to be shorter. What I do is I sell this to a business and then they give it away again to the individuals that need it. And so having it be shorter where it's more affordable for the business to give them away is a much more economical model. And what I have found and the feedback I've gotten is people are more likely to read it because it's shorter. That is a consistent theme that I've discovered over time and a consistent mistake that I was making, and I see other professors make it. In most situations where we're trying to do problem solving, we need to make it short and specific. And the quicker they can reach their goal, the better. And as professors, we really like the background. We really like the theory. We like the lit review. We like the whole story. What is the foundation for all of this? In most cases, most people, if it's not actively helping them solve their problem, they don't care. On the financial side of things, I have probably made 40 times as much money from my pet loss booklets as I have my real counseling widowers real book. And I'm sure there are situations that there are people see that I kind of created a self-published thing and they might think, well, that's not doesn't have a lot of research in it. It's not very literary or whatever. It helps people. To be honest, I have one large pet cremation client. They made an order last week. The profit from that one order out earned my entire booklet's lifetime's earnings in one order. And so businesses want help solving problems, and they'll pay for that if you can get everything to line up correctly. It's a whole different way of thinking about it. We're up to number 4. We're talking about speaking to solve. This is selling your presence. And the reason why I talk about that is it took me a long time to learn this. Being paid to speak has a performative element, and it is very different than teaching. Yes, you are standing in front of a collection of people, but it's completely different. If you don't believe me, imagine this. Imagine you're going to an academic conference, they have breakout sessions, you see a topic you like, you go to that room, a person standing at the front, you sit down and they say, hey, by the way, what I realized is that my most recent, a reprint of my most recent article that was published actually gives the best information. So I'm just going to pass that out and just let you read it. Of course, we would be like, what are you talking? We're here to hear you speak about it. There's always a performative piece to it. That doesn't mean you have to dress up in a clown suit and kind of juggle and and entertain in that sense of things. but there always is a performative element to it. And in terms of recognizing your audience, recognizing your role, what you're there for, what your host hopes going to happen, what your audience hopes going to happen, those sorts of things. There's always a performative element to it. Most of this, I kind of break down speaking types into keynotes is probably not what you're going to start out at. What I have created a whole, a significant portion of my profession and my marketing strategy is doing continuing education presentations. I also, given my expertise in grief and bereavement, I'm sometimes called in to be a speaker for a remembrance service or those sorts of things that would be related to grief and loss. You're probably not going to get paid very often to be a panel host or a member, but those might be early opportunities where you can start to get some more experience with speaking kind of in a new field. Really focusing for me, the number 2 and 3, they're the continuing education presentations and the small events or special program presentations. Let me give you an example of this. This isn't a professor. This happens to be an individual who got his law degree along with his master's in public administration. But Ryan early on was a volunteer at a shelter for unhoused individuals, gained experience there, kind of learned on the job, went off, got his law degree, came back, and became the executive director of this rather large organization and had a fair amount of expertise. Now, I don't think this is how he started, but this is how it could have started. Imagine that Ryan has a friend who works at a local library and they are, mentioning that they're having some challenges with unhoused individuals. How do we train our staff? How do we train our volunteers to have an empathic response? How can we, create a welcoming environment for everyone? Those sorts of things. How we have some of these individuals who may have psychological disorders or mental illness. What do we need to know about that? And so what Ryan has done is created a program, a training, and started off live and then turned it into an online training, as I remember it, that's used by thousands of organizations specifically on how to, as you see there, how to confidently and compassionately solve problem behavior, and a variety of other topics. So that you could see very easily someone with a social work background, psychology background, or other background that might have the specific expertise, taking that training, but using it in a very problem-solving oriented way to help individuals who might be working at nonprofits, public libraries, and things like that. Like I mentioned before, a lot of my presentations have come from continuing education, getting continuing education units, CE, CEUs. This is just a small sample of licensed professionals who need CEs. You do not have to be one of these professionals or licensed to do a presentation for them, to do a paid presentation for them. Most of my CE presentations have been for nurses, social workers, and funeral directors, and I am none of those 3 things. I'm certainly not licensed in any of those areas. But there's a variety of different topics that are related to a wide variety of different professions. If they are public facing, if they deal with the public or clients, often for a common thing is that they might need 10 hours of continuing education credits over 2 years, for example. One of those hours might have to be in ethics. One of those hours might have to be in, child or elder abuse or cultural competence, something kind of public facing. So if you have a specialization in some of these areas and you're able to craft that presentation so that it really speaks to one group of these professionals and they feel like you really care about them, you can create a pretty significant business doing CE presentations in that way. In the last 11 years, I've spoken in 33 different states doing mostly CE presentations. Right now, I do about 75% in person, 25% paid webinars. Obviously, that was different during COVID, but that's where I've kind of settled here a couple of years after COVID. I do some other special events and workshops, but the majority of these are paid CE presentations, mostly for different associations who have licensed individuals there. Sometimes I do trainings for businesses too, to kind of train their staff on the same topics, so to speak. One great thing about speaking is that it gets you in front of your audience, and that's often if you have a service that you can also provide those professionals. You can't sell from the stage. You can't talk a lot about what you could do for them, but you can certainly, one, introduce yourself. They get to know you. there might be some ways where you kind of show how important it is to have certain skills and you happen to provide those services or skills. But you can't, it's not a commercial, obviously, but you can get in front of those audiences, become known. They get to see that you're hopefully a likable person, someone that they might want to work with. And that's as an individual who doesn't have a huge budget for marketing, like I'm not doing commercials, I'm doing paid speaking gigs, and then I'm there in front of the audience who I'm hoping will hire me as well. I've done everything from 20 minutes, kind of on the short end, up to about like 5 hour workshops or 5 hour presentations. Occasionally, I do, if the audience is right, I will do it for free, although that's less and less common. It has to be really the best audience uh, that I have a really high likelihood of selling, making connections that I will later sell services to. My highest, there's lots of speakers who make a lot more than this, but my highest has been kind of high four figures, just to kind of give you somewhat a range. My typical situation is I would go to an association meeting, the funeral directors of Illinois. I do maybe 2 hours, two presentations, 1 hour each, and I might ask for something in the low four figures, in addition to having them pay for my travel and hotel. Just as one example. Sometimes you get to go to another country. This, uh, I worked for an organization over in the UK. My wife immediately jumped on that and said, "I'm coming with you." So once in a while, I've seen beautiful places in the UK, beautiful places around the United States, and been to states that I'd never been to. And uh, you know, organizations tend to have their meetings at places that are fun to visit, and so you can take advantage of the town or the setting or whatever it might be. The big mistake I see professors making on the speaking side of things is mistaking the value content or valuing the content over the connection with the audience, so to speak. So I think this quote is somewhat relevant. People do anything for those who encourage their dreams, justify their failures, allay their fears, confirm their suspicions, and help them throw rocks at their enemies. Might be overstating it a little bit, but an audience wants to know that you care about them and want to have some connection with them. That doesn't mean you can't challenge them, but really, it really does help if you can show that you kind of connect with them. Like I said before, there's a performative element in all speaking gigs. Your content is important. I'm not saying your content is worthless, but I've seen professors, it looked like professor brought in the PowerPoint that they show to their class and just kind of changed the first slide and then tried to give that, assuming people had all this background knowledge, assuming they were just kind of head down talking to the slide, not really connecting with the audience. Celebrity speakers, if you're Brene Brown, if you're, Michelle Obama, not that they would ever do this, but they can get away with no connection. They do, they tell good stories and they make a connection to the audience. Bob Dylan might be a better example, is kind of famous for Bob Dylan is not going to say, "Let me tell you the funny story about how I came up with the lyrics for the song." Bob Dylan is, sees it as a performance that is more of an art form, and so he's going to treat it that way. As speakers, we can't. We've got to connect with our audience in various ways. We're up to number 5. This is teaching to transform. This is where we're selling a learning experience to the student. I talk about what I call student clients because these are very different than the students in our classrooms who have to be there, who kind of have to do what we say, and we get to set the requirements and the goals, an 8-page paper, a 3,000-word essay, what the dissertation looks like, those sorts of things. If you're teaching outside of higher ed, then the student is somebody who can fire you and certainly not recommend you if you're not helping them meet their goal. This would include mentoring, coaching, facilitating, anything that would have an instruction and feedback loop. That's what the distinction I make between speaking is what I'm doing right now is just kind of focus on sharing the information, hopefully make a connection, maybe answering a few questions. But teaching is really, did the student get it? Oh, no, you missed it. Let's try this. And we're giving feedback as you work towards your goal. Success for teaching to a student client is whether or not they get the transformation that they want. And usually there's almost always kind of an emotional element to that. So here's an example of an actual business. It's not faculty who run this, but you can easily see how, theater faculty or someone else who's trained in improv could do this. This is a group of improv enthusiasts who focus on teaching leadership style and elevates work through this immersive learning and impactful training. Obviously, given that it's improv, the people are going to be actively involved in the process and they'll be giving feedback as part of the process. And so that's an example of a teaching element there. The big mistake for selling your teaching process is not focusing on their goals. We want to find out what they want, and it almost always has some sort of emotional component to it. So, for example, instead of saying you're a chemistry tutor, you might frame it more, I help pre-med majors pass organic chemistry so they can achieve their dreams. Instead of offering guitar lessons, you might say, I help non-musicians learn to play a song in the very first lesson. Now, as you're talking to that, student client, they may say, I want to take guitar lessons, honestly, because our extended family goes to the Wisconsin Dells and goes camping every summer as kind of like a family reunion. My grandfather used to pull out the guitar and play songs. Unfortunately, he passed away. In 6 months, I want to be able to pull out the guitar and play the songs that my grandpa played for my family. So like as adult learners, they're focused on a specific outcome. It's helped me get to that outcome as quickly as possible, and I'm happy to pay you for that. One more, I tutor math, or I help good students who hate math pass the GRE quantitative so they can get into grad school. This is my first side business. And I'm going to tell you a very short story about how it evolved because it gives you a sense of, this is usually not linear, is what I'm talking about. In the United States, the GRE, the graduate record exam, is the grad school test that many folks, at least in the past, social sciences and humanities would have to take. And it included a quantitative section, whether the field included a quantitative component or not. What I noticed was that a lot of our students who were doing well in my classes were underperforming. And so my first step was to just provide a once a week evening tutoring session focused on GRE style problems, the math problems. So the first week went pretty well. 7 or 8 students showed up. Second week, 2 or 3. And by the third week, 1 or 0 people showed up. And so like I was volunteering for this at my college. I was trying to be a good professor, but I'm not going to show up if you're not going to show up. So I stopped doing that. But then I heard that my students were going to a test prep company, driving 35 minutes each way, paying $1,200 that they said they didn't have, and getting 20 hours of instruction, usually from a grad student who was reading out of a binder. And so my second attempt was to then basically kind of mimic that. I made it an intensive weekend. I copied the 20 hours, but I did it at less than half price, or eventually I did it at half price compared to what they did. And I kind of partnered with my college to kind of set this up, and they let me do that. That was a way that I could have some guaranteed income, because at the time I would often take on summer classes, but I might not get paid my full amount because the class needed 6 students in the class for me to get paid my full amount, and it wasn't always making. So this was something that was a little bit more under my control to do that. This was the first side gig that I ever did, was kind of coming up with my own summer class, or kind of special workshop sort of class that I did. And the goal was to help them get into the grad school that they wanted to. So as a teacher, you definitely want to focus on getting to the fun stuff as fast as you can. We love theory. If a student learner is there, they want to get their hands dirty. If you're teaching them archaeology, if we're teaching them to draw, they want to go home with some drawings. If you're teaching genealogy, they need to be finding their ancestors in the first session. That's what they want to do. They don't want to go too much into. Now you can sprinkle in the theory over time if it's really that important. Here's a couple of examples of some creative. These are some individuals that I've had some experience with online. Jacques has been teaching piano in 21 days for over 10 years. As you can see, he says he helps regular people learn to play their favorite songs as fast as possible. He had taken piano lessons for 12 years, and when he was like 18 or 19, realized he only knew 2 popular songs that his friends wanted to hear. And he thought, there's got to be a better way. And what he discovered is that his clients, his students, are people who don't want to learn classical music or sheet music. They want to play the songs they hear, whether that's current pop songs, pop songs or current songs when they were growing up, whatever that might be. Um, and so just as he had over 10,000 students, the price hasn't always been at this rate, but you can kind of do the math there to kind of show this is absolutely his full-time job. He then started actually teaching other people. This was an online course, still available. He started teaching other folks, and he was teaching this guy named Nate Dodson. Nate had graduated with a bachelor's in some form of natural science because his first job was spraying invasive species with pesticides. And he felt like that wasn't good for your health to be around pesticides 24/7. He had developed Crohn's disease, and he was trying to make some healthy options and a more healthy lifestyle. So he was growing microgreens at his home just to kind of, something he wanted to have a healthy option. He had complete control of where the plants were being grown. He decided that this might be something that other people want to do. I think he also started, had enough of a product that he had a relationship set up with certain restaurants where he would provide them with their microgreens for their salads and those sorts of things. Um, I don't think it's going as strong as it was when early on. Nate hit on a niche that nobody else was doing. He started pre-COVID and it took off. I know that there were some months where he was making over $40,000 a month from his online course. Now that's lightning in a bottle. That's kind of getting really lucky, and that would certainly not be typical. But sometimes those things happen in that situation. Our last one, thanks for hanging in there with me. Our sixth type is what I call convene to connect. And this is where you sell a community. So we've started with presenting, then we go to teaching, and then we move up the direct connection sort of line with teaching, but also with a community element. And this is when you have a community when the people self-identify with the group. And typically there's also communication among the group members that doesn't necessarily always go through you as the group leader. They might be passionate about a topic, a hobby. They might have a shared identity, a shared challenge. They might have a shared diagnosis or phase of life. Those sorts of things are common community things that communities are built around. They're commonly online, but they could also be in person. And some of them are hybrid where you do some things online, but once in a while you meet or get together. Um, One really interesting example, Dr. Walker, the PhD in English literature, he happens to be a Harvard grad, really wanted a community focused on poetry. And so that's what he's created. It's mostly an online community where people discuss all kinds of literature, specifically poetry. Taking from his LinkedIn, he claims that this is an online school of over 600 readers at $25 a month. I don't, I'm just kind of taking what we're getting from various sources from the website and those sorts of things. But that's what a really direct example of taking your expertise in the classroom. And I think there is a niche here for if you teach a topic that students love, but maybe they feel like, well, that's not a safe thing to major in because my parents told me it has to be practical, so I'm going to major in business or something else, something else. A lot of times people come back, they're still interested in that topic, and maybe as I forgot to point this out. I know that Jacques with the piano in 21 days, his most common student is someone who just retired, someone who's usually in their 60s. They have some money, they have a lot of time, and they want to get into the hobbies that they had to put off for decades. And so that's his most common person. I'd be curious to talk to Dr. Walker and see if he has kind of a specific profile of people who are signing up for his community. One more example, this is Dr. Harold. She's a speech pathologist, speech language pathologist. She started as a professor, and while she was a professor, if I remember the origin story correctly, she realized that speech language pathologists as practitioners didn't have time to read all the research articles and pull out the bits that would be relevant. So that's what she started a regular newsletter, and that's what she did. Kind of take the research articles. This is what might be useful for you as practitioners, and that kind of grew. And then I believe, if I remember correctly, because she was basically doing a lot of teaching already, she got approved to offer continuing education credits, and the membership grew. And then we have a lot of members in one place. Then the people who want to hire SLPs would come and say, we want to post our jobs here. And so what they've done is been really careful about protecting their memberships, and they have strict requirements on what jobs they'll post. They only post jobs that are above the 10th percentile in pay. They make them list the job requirements and break down the job duties and very specifically. They're really protective of their members. So they've got over 40,000 members, and as well as organizations. Your whole speech language clinic can be a member at the clinic level and kind of have the membership for all your professionals that might work for you, for example. So that's an example of great example of taking that direct research experience and turning it into something very practical, so to speak. The mistake a lot of people make with a community is choosing a topic that's a poor fit for a community. So, for example, potty training is a more short-term sort of thing. That might make for a good online course or training program while that's happening. But hopefully, if you're successful, that doesn't last very long. Conversely, you might have, women in the natural sciences who are on the tenure track. That's a long process. There's a lot you can discuss there. There's a journey that those individuals are going through together. That I think would be a great fit for a community, so to speak. I wanted to take just 2 seconds to briefly revisit these. Imagine for a moment that you are a history professor, you specialize in the US Civil War. Maybe you've come up with this as your business name, this Blue and Gray Historical Consulting, have a logo. I want to take you through very briefly through six examples. Let's go through. So, for example, your expertise, more that consulting thing, might be advising museums or historical sites regarding accuracy of their displays and things like that. Or you could have a whole service where you were individuals who have family members who were in the Civil War. You could go to the archives, pull out historical documentation, and create a custom family history, maybe even a family book that would have some of that documentation in it for the family, for example. On paid to publish, you might create a self-guided walking tour, maybe just a booklet for a specific historic battlefield. You could have a whole line of these for each battlefield. You might get paid to present for museums or historical sites, or maybe even more likely if there's like, the New York State, Civil War enthusiasts or something like that. These member associations might want a variety of speakers to talk on certain specific topics. You might offer intensive course on teaching other people how to get into the Civil War archives and how they can do their own research. That might be something as a teaching process if you've got some people who are really into that. And you might create an online membership of just Civil War aficionados. That might be an online thing, but maybe once or twice a year you might say, okay, on this weekend I'm going to be in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. People who show up, we can do a tour together, and you can kind of meet me in person, and we can have kind of an in-person in addition to the online component. So those are the 6 subtypes. I want to reiterate really briefly, everybody starts small. Because I'm talking about more full-fledged businesses, that might be intimidating, but they all started with, Dr. Harold started with a newsletter focusing on a few articles and pulling out some results. You start with one paid CE presentation for one organization. I want to let you know that your plan is always going to evolve. I don't know of a single person who said, I think I'm going to do this and sell it to these people. It never survives all the iterations, and that's fine. Just expect that it's always going to evolve based on feedback from your expected clients. Sometimes those are minor adjustments. Sometimes it's starting over and trying something else, but it's always going to evolve. Don't worry about your logo. Don't worry about your business card. Don't worry about the window dressing. Just focus on helping somebody. Ideally, somebody who has a problem that for them is expensive in one way or another, that they're willing to trade money for someone to solve it for them. But the most important thing is just start by focusing on helping somebody. Going forward, like I mentioned, I hope to, in a couple of months, have a book out. These would be a couple chapters in the book with a lot more information that I wasn't able to include. I'm curious about whether or not there's any interest in a community for professors who are trying to start side businesses, to give them support, answer questions along the way.